truth effect. So by now you probably know that nothing is what it seems. Things may appear to be one thing, but are actually something else. But that's with illusions. But what about things that we can actually perceive? Or the things that we know about? How can we know if they are real? Dates, facts, trivia and recollections, news, and what else? Today, let's talk about the illusion of truth effect, a type of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias? What's that? Well, let's talk about it first. A cognitive bias is a recurring systematic pattern of deviation from norm, or rationality in making judgments and decisions. And don't worry. Remember the saying that nobody is perfect? Well, it's true. And a study of cognitive biases will prove it. Don't believe us? Well, here are a few common cognitive biases. The self-serving bias is the tendency to claim more responsibility and credit for successes rather than for failure. The hindsight bias is the "I knew it all along" effect. It is the inclination to see past events as predictable. Sound familiar? Now let's get back to the illusory truth effect, or the tendency of people to believe information to be correct after being exposed to it for many times. Can't believe it? Well, let's take a look at some established truths, if you will. Here's one. You've probably seen it in many movies. The silencer is used to silence noisy gunfire. And while many may think that it can be used up close without making a bang, its effect only dampens the sound a bit. From 150 decibels without a silencer to about 120 decibels with it. That's still as loud as a jackhammer. But because of repeated exposure to the effects of silencers in many films, most people just believe it works that way. How about this? Ever heard of the saying that the dominant side of the brain affects a person's personality, creativity, and logic? Well, a few years ago, countless articles mostly found in the magazines and the internet have been alluding that it is somehow connected to which side of the brain is dominantly used. Well, actually, being creative or logical has no direct connection to which side of the brain is being used. Researchers at the University of Utah studied 1,000 brains and found out that each of the participants are actually using their whole brains entirely and equally while doing different tasks. But that's with trivial matters. So why is it important? Well, let's take a look at this particular medical belief back in the day. Humorism was a medical theory that was prevalent in Western medicine that started in ancient Egypt and Greece and was practiced until even the late 19th century. The theory states that the body is composed primarily of four humors, namely blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. Physical and psychological illnesses were said to be caused by an imbalance of the four humors. Doctors at the time used methods like bloodletting, vomiting, purges, and a host of herbal medicines to tackle illnesses back in the day. And while some illnesses were cured, others were completely left untreated or even worse, misdiagnosed. This even left some people too scared to go to the doctor. Whew! Now that sounds like a recipe for a health scare. Thankfully, these commonly held beliefs and myths have been disproven with the help of research and development. And as a result, people now have more informed choices, especially with important matters such as health and wellness. Remember, knowing about cognitive biases helps us better understand ourselves. It helps us to become more informed and better equipped in making decisions. tilt-shift photography. Miniatures? Sure, it looks like it. But what if we told you that these scenes are not miniatures? They're the real deal. That's right, they're real. It's just the illusion created by a type of lens. They're called tilt-shift lenses. And these types of pictures and scenes are part of tilt-shift photography and videography. So what makes the effect? Well, the secret behind it is the way the lens is built. A tilt-shift lens is a lens that allows the lens to be shifted upwards or downwards. This is what creates the miniature effect. But why does it appear so? It has something to do with the camera's depth of field. See, by tilting the lens, the perspective of the image also changes with it. The movement of the lens also shifts the focus. This allows a certain section of the photograph to appear in focus and puts the upper and lower sections of the image out of focus. This causes the image to appear as if it was a miniature diorama shot with a macro lens. To illustrate better, let's grab a piece of paper with a graphic. If you view it flat against the wall, well, you're only looking at it at one point. That's good if you are far enough. But if you're super close, you need to tilt the sheet to be able to see everything. Now, you can't really tilt objects in a photograph or even buildings for that matter. But that's where tilting the lens comes in. Actually, the first production cameras usually featured a bellow-type barrel for the lens. As such, they are basically tilt-shift lens because the lens part is movable. Newer tilt-shift cameras feature pivot and tilt joints that can be finely adjusted and even locked into place. Aside from shooting miniature-looking scenes, tilt-shift lenses are also good for shooting architecture, especially tall structures. Shifting the lens allows taller subjects to be captured at closer distances. This is done by using the tilt shift to skew the perspective, which would be quite impossible using normal lenses. But tilt shift lenses are considerably expensive for the hobbyist. But don't worry. With a little bit of DIYing, you can create a cheap tilt shift lens. This would require a barrel-type plunger and some screw clamps and maybe a cheap extra lens. Basically, the lens is attached to the plunger's barrel as well as the mount. Then these are held in place with some glue and screw clamps. Extra care must be taken when attaching the lens to the barrel. Creating a seal with as little gaps as possible is key to ensuring that there are no light leaks. However, some photographers prefer to have a few light leaks here and there as added effects to their photos. As you can see, the plunger's barrel will let the lens shift up, down, left, and right. Experimenting with the material and length of the barrel will also affect the overall tilt-shift effect that you are after. But whatever lens you use, tilt-shift photography will require you to practice to get the proper effect down. Night Hag Syndrome. Now let's talk about something creepy. The night hag or the old hag syndrome. It's actually a sleep condition where one experiences a heaviness on their chest coupled by a terrifying feeling of being unable to move. Some people even report seeing unknown or even supernatural humanoid figures that adds to the feeling of distress. Worse, sometimes reports say that these ghastly figures seem to force the people into submission, making it harder to move and even breathe. The name comes from the night hag, a terrifying creature of folklore. Sounds like something out of a horror movie, doesn't it? And it's not as rare as you might think. Researchers say that as many as 8% of people all over the world experience this phenomenon at least once. But don't be scared. Let's turn on the lights and examine the night hag syndrome, or better known as the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. Basically, sleep paralysis is the phenomenon where one is in the middle of falling asleep and being awake. It's like an in-between transition state where the body is in a sleep-like state, while the person's mind and eyes are already awake. The phenomenon, of course, causes discomfort because an awake mind is experiencing paralysis of the body. So it would feel like being trapped in a motionless body. You can't even scream. So imagine that. If that's not distressing enough, remember the hallucinations that accompany it? Ghastly apparitions, strangers watching you, or even aliens. Scientists suggest that these hallucinations can be explained by the field of neuropsychology. After all, people in sleep paralysis could be considered in a half-dreaming, half-awake state. So hallucinations might be a case of the brain trying to make sense of the situation. Sleep paralysis often occurs when one nears the REM stage of sleep. This can happen before falling asleep, or just as one is about to wake up. At this stage, the body is still paralyzed, so to speak, as it is in a sleep state, leaving a person that is in the awaking stage unable to take control of their body. So what causes the illusion that triggers the hallucination of scary beings? The panic hallucination model says that the hallucination is caused by a panic-like arousal or fight or flight response triggered by the fact that limb control and feedback seems to be absent during sleep paralysis. This triggers fear and the sensation of pressure on the chest. The hallucination can also be reinforced with influences from one's cultural background, like belief in a certain folklore or religion. Meanwhile, in the field of neuroscience, the type of illusion called the intruder illusion can be explained due to a disturbance in the functioning and reception of the different senses of the body. Since the body is asleep, its senses are desynchronized. Research suggests that the parietal lobe may play a part in the phenomenon. Electrical stimulation of this lobe is said to cause the illusion of a shadow-like being imitating the body's posture. There are many possible causes of sleep paralysis, like stress, fatigue, and symptoms of narcolepsy, or the condition where one tends to fall asleep whenever in relaxing conditions. People who experience sleep paralysis can try out some steps to prevent it, like following a regular sleep schedule, lessening tiring activities, avoiding stimulants, and sleeping in a supine position. Tightrope walking. It's a trick as old as organized entertainment. For centuries, tightrope walkers have been risking life and limb by seemingly defying odds and gravity as they take on the tightrope, scaling it from point A to point B, all in the name of performance and entertainment. Now it's a given. Most of us who can walk already have a hard time maintaining balance over narrow obstacles. But what more with a rope? Well, let's delve deeper into the art of tightrope walking. Tightrope walking can be found in many ancient cultures. The term funambulism, another word for tightrope walking, comes from the Greek funis or rope and ambulate or walk. In ancient Greek and Roman times, the act, though physically demanding, was not considered sporty enough. So it was relegated as a form of entertainment done by court jesters and performers. This trend would continue well into the medieval age of kings and queens, where performances were constantly held at royal gatherings. In the 1800s, the act would see itself join the popular big tent circus as a staple act. And through the years, tightrope artists would push the envelope, reaching higher places and oftentimes making the distances longer. Among them were notable performers like Maria Spelterini, who crossed the Niagara Falls over a tightrope, Philippe Petit, who scaled the towers of the World Trade Center, and Eskil Ronningsbakken, who would tightrope between two hot air balloons. Wow! But how does one walk a tightrope? What's the secret behind the dangerous and death-defying stunt? Well, as any performer would tell you, the first thing is always practice. But it also helps if you know the principles and basics behind the trick. Performers maintain their balance by shifting their center of mass directly over their legs and feet. When crossing a tightrope, the base of support is wide in the lateral position, or left and right side, but very narrow in sagittal or front and back position. Of course, this means that the sway or the direction of fall is either from the left or right. That's why most performers have outstretched arms to help with balance. The ankle is used as the pivot point, since there is little space in the rope to turn. Sometimes performers use a pole for balance as well. This distributes the mass away from the ankles or pivot point, and increases the moment of inertia and reduces angular acceleration, which results to less tipping. Performers can also use the pole to adjust balance and sway on the fly, merely tilting the pole to compensate. Also, performers usually wear leather-soled footwear to protect their feet from abrasions and bruising through the tightrope's braided wire. Although amateurs and beginners usually train barefoot with softer and silkier fiber rope. But it goes without saying that tightrope performance is not without dangers. Several unfortunate accidents in the past have led to numerous different safety innovations for tightrope artists. Among them are a catch net and safety line rigging. If you are interested and want to try it out for yourself, well, first get in touch and train with professionals to ensure proper form and, of course, your safety.
not be complete without a quick discussion on some notable rethinkers. People who are responsible for giving us these mind-boggling illusions and tricks. Today's featured rethinker is Maria Spelterini. Maria Spelterini, also known as Marie Spelterina, was an Italian tightrope walker who is most famously known as the first and only woman to have walked over the Niagara Falls via tightrope, and not just once, but 5 times during her career. Now let's take a look at her humble beginnings. Maria was born in Italy on July 7, 1853. Maria was part of a touring act that performed throughout Europe and Russia in the early 1870s. Accounts tell of her amazing tightrope crossings at the Moskva River in Moscow and the River Neva in St. Petersburg before performing for the American crowds. Perhaps it's her stint in the US that made her famous and still fondly remembered in tightrope performance circles until today. In July 8, 1876, just a day after her 23rd birthday, Maria was scheduled to cross the Niagara Gorge as part of the featured acts in celebration of the US Centennial. For the act, she utilized a 2¼ inch wire. The act took place near the north part of the lower suspension bridge above the Niagara. She would then embark on another crossing of the Niagara in July 12 of 1876, this time wearing peach baskets strapped to her feet. In July 19th of the same year, she would attempt and successfully complete a blindfolded attempt at crossing the Niagara. And on July 22nd of the same year, just a few days after, she would do it again, this time with wrists and ankles cuffed, until she made her final crossing on the 26th of the month.